Welcome back to the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. Basically, it's practice for what you'll be asked to do in the real world. In this lesson, we're going to wire up our Blazor WebAssembly products page to our API. This is our first major step into using an API with permissions. We'll need to make sure that we only let authorized users see the page, and we'll need to make sure that our data loads properly and that it's displayed properly. Finally, we'll need to tweak the page to look better now that we actually have actual data to use. Now, for those of you who are subscribed on my Patreon at the $5 per month level or higher, head on over to get today's copy of the source code. That'll give you a good copy to compare to your code to make sure that if you run into an issue, you can look at mine to see what the differences are. All right, let's jump right into Visual Studio and get started writing our code. Now, the page in question is going to be in the Web Apps portal, and then inside here we have pages. We have our products page, which right now we have this for loop that is giving us just temporary data. If you don't remember, let's boot up real quick, just make sure it still boots. It should, we haven't changed anything, but it's always a good thing to check. Just like if I was working on a team, I would also pull down my code from the central repository or from Git to make sure that I had the latest version. All right, so we have our portal, or I'm sorry, our products page, which right now looks like this. That's all of our samples. That's the 1 through 7 we created. We're gonna replace these with actual data coming from the API, which also means we need to be logged in order to see it. So we're gonna have to do both of those things. Okay, let's close this out. I'll close out all the extra screens that opened, and we're going to first get that data. So let's come down here. We're gonna say private list of product model. And I need to make sure this is going to be, let's do this, equals new. Well, let's not do new. Let's actually leave it as empty because we'll load it later, but we're gonna have to do a check for null then. So we'll do a null check. We'll wrap this whole thing in a null check to make sure we don't try and load it if there's no entries. So we'll need to make sure you remember that. So protected override, we're gonna override the on-initialized async. Now it does mess our formatting up a little bit. It's not a problem. We can just hit Shift Tab to move it backwards one. We can get rid of this return based on initialized async. And in here, I'm going to say that products equals, I'm going to call it. So how do I call it? Well, I have to use dependency injection. At inject I product endpoint. Let's call this product endpoint. Real creative there. Then down here, we can say product endpoint. This is why dependency injection is so great. I just said, hey, I'm gonna need that. And it said, cool, no problem, I'll take care of it. Product endpoint dot get all, which is awaitable. So we wanna say await product endpoint get all, which is gonna yell at me and say, hey, you can't do that. And you say, wait, it's returning a task, right? Well, it's actually needing to be marked still as async task. So now it's going to properly load the products with a list of product model once it gets them all from the API. So now we have our list of products. We can come up here and change this for loop to a for each loop. So I can say, instead of this, I can say for each, and then I can say, let's say product model product in products. So that's a for each loop instead of a for loop. And then down here we can start replacing elements. So that's the description down here. So I can say at product dot, I got this whole list here. I found a little trick here. This list is basically anything you could apply to this that is an HTML and CSS. But if I hit backspace once and do it again, then it brings up just the model. And that gives me my description. So A little quirky there, but it does work. Product dot, and then quantity in stock. And then down here, this is the name. Product dot, again, back up and do it once more. Product name. And then I'm going to replace just the numbers, not the $. Say at product dot, again, back off and do it again, retail price. Notice the IntelliCode is pretty sure it knows what you want based upon where you're putting it, which is really intelligent. So yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. Now I left the $sign here, which means that it's going to have a decimal number. We're going to put a $sign in front of it. That's not typically how you would do formatting for money, except for the fact that right now I am just talking about US dollars. I can't just say, oh, we'll change that to euros or change that to whatever, because that's not how money works. You can't just say, instead of $5, say €5. They're two different currencies with two different values. So we can't just take the dollar amounts in the database and just put a different currency number in front of them. So there's more to localization than just changing the currency amount. So in this case, we only have dollars in the database. We don't have a translation system for what that would be in another currency. Therefore, I'll leave it as a $sign. In a production website, this is a pretty significant piece of the website. For example, on my site, IamTimCo.com, you can purchase courses in your currency for a number of currencies across the globe. But that's not a simple system. In fact, it's a system I outsource. I use a company called FastSpring. And what they do is they figure out, okay, based upon today's exchange rate, based upon all these different factors, here's what that cost will be. And so they handle the currency conversion. So if you wanted to get into something like that, it would be a lot more than just saying, hey, localize this to the current currency. You need to make sure that you don't give away your products for the wrong value, because some currencies will be cheaper than others to buy the same thing then, and that would be confusing and problematic. So we're just going to hard code that $sign there. So with that, I think we've got everything: quantity, description, product name, retail price. The image we're going to leave for now. That's going to be next lesson. We're going to handle replacing these with real images all the way from the database all the way on through. But I think this is good for now. So let's run this. I know we don't have anything in here for, well, we do need to have something in here. We do need to have, let's do this. Let's wrap this div right here, which is a whole row. I'm going to actually cut it out. So now it's just a container fluid. We're going to say if products is null, and we're going to do something, and we'll say else, and then in here we'll put our actual code. Now, right now, we're suffering from the 4 spaces per tab. So 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces per tab. That's a lot. And because of that, we've got a lot of indent here, and I've got it zoomed in for the camera. So that's another reason why we don't see a whole lot on the screen. It's something we need to address. Probably the best way of addressing this right now is to shrink down to 2 spaces per tab. And I may do that in a little bit. But for right now, let's just put our if statement in here. Let's just do a div class equals row. And then in here, we'll do let's just do a quick paragraph. I hit P and I hit tab. That's using Emmet, E-M-M-E-T. That's a shortcut, basically, that allows you to create some pretty cool stuff pretty quickly inside of HTML. So paragraph here that just says you are not, or let's put it this way, no products have been loaded. You shouldn't ever see this, because if you're not authorized, you shouldn't go to this page. But if somehow they got here, that's what they'll see. So let's try this just as is. Now we're not logged in. We shouldn't see any products and it shouldn't load any because it should error out on us, which is okay. So let's go to /products. No product's been loaded, and then we have an error. And if you hit F12 on the error and look at it, let's expand it out a little bit. The error is unauthorized right here. So we're not authorized to get the products, the get all. Not a problem. Let's go back in here and log in. Actually, let's go back to our home and hit refresh. We have to reload the page once we've had an error. Now we'll log in. And this login does have permissions. So if we now go to /products, we now have 2 products. So it is loading properly now. It's a little ugly. We got, this is just the fact that it's a short description. We should increase that. But we also have a spacing issue here. So these are a little too big. Now, if you hit F12 again, this is something you learn in the Foundation Web Development course, is that you can use this little selector element right here. Select it. Now, I've expanded the page and now it's big enough, but if we come in here and just change this class from H4 to H5, and then we shrink the page back down to what it was, it's still on one line. So I like that better. That seems to work well at all breakpoints. So it seems to always be on one line now instead of 2. So with that, I think we're going to change that over to H5 instead of H4. So that is right down here, H5. Okay. And again, we talked about this last time, but this is a class that we're using. It's not a header 5 or header 4. So we're not changing the level of indentation or level on the outline. We're just changing the sizing. So that wasn't a ton of stuff in order to get information from our API. It just kind of works because we already have everything else set up, except for some of the authorization point things. Now, before we get to those though, I do want to add, let's go to our Solution Explorer. Let's add a menu link here. So let's go to Shared Nav Menu. We have 2 links here, one for Home and one for Verify Authentication. Let's add another one. Let's just copy this list item. We're going to put it in between. And this one is going to be, instead of Verify Auth, the page will be Products. And this is going to be our Products page. And OI dash, I don't think we have a product in here. We'll probably just pick one randomly because it's just easier. Let's do Cloudy. All right, sounds good. So now we should have a navigation link to click on to go to our products page instead of always having to figure out if or what the URL is. So that takes care of that. But now we need to figure out, how do we stop people from going there if they're not authorized? And to do that, we have to go to app.razor. And the app.razor page, we do have some authorization stuff already. We have this authorizing, but we need another one, which is going to be the not authorized. Now, since we want to use this for authorization, we need to wrap this entire thing. I'm going to do a Control X to cut it out. It's kind of easiest. I'm going to say cascading authentication state. And then inside here, we'll have the router. So I paste it back in. And the reason I did that is because this cascading authentication state will grab the authentication state as it changes and pass it into the router. So it will pass down that information about the authentication state. Now we have that, let's inside of the authorized route view, let's add another tag here called not authorized. So what happens when you're not authorized for a specific page? Well, I'm gonna put just a little HTML. We could put a whole component in here, or we could put just HTML or even just text if you want to. But like notice up here we have just text. Please wait, we are authorizing you. We've seen that once in a while. In here, let's say H1, and then again, that's Emmett, just H1 tab. I'm gonna say, oops, you do not have access. Now again, P and tab, and I'm gonna say inside here for paragraph, the page or component you are trying to reach requires you to have more permissions than you currently do. Please contact the administrator if you think you have reached this page in error. Okay, so essentially, hey, if you try to get to this page and you don't have access, we're gonna tell you, nope, you don't have access to this. And if you think that's a problem, like you should have access to it, then contact the administrator. No, I did say that page or component. Remember that with Blazor, we can treat a whole page as just a component on another page. So in theory, you could have access to most of the page, and then a little part of the page will have this message saying, oops, nope, you don't have access to this. So with that, let's load this back up and see how it works. Because we're not actually done yet, but I want to make sure that you see this. All right, so let's load up here, and all right, so now we're authorizing you. Hello world, we're logged in, cool. Notice the products page here. We go to the products page, cool, loads up just fine. Let's log out. Go back to the products page. No products have been loaded. We have an unhandled error. So I don't get that message. And if we go to the unhandled error, you have 12. It's gonna say unauthorized right here on the get all method. So what's the problem here? And this is where a lot of people get stuck and they're like, man, I did the authentication correctly. I did the authorization correctly. You missed one step, okay? And that is, there's nowhere on this page that says this is what you can and cannot access. In fact, you don't see anywhere here where it says you can't access this page. Now, when you try to make this call down here to get all, it goes, oh no, you don't have access to this page, or at least this data. So we could just kind of put a wrapper in here and do a check and then have it kind of exit the page somehow, or do an if statement like this, but that's not really elegant. Instead, we know this entire page shouldn't be viewed unless you are authorized. So at attribute, and then the attribute is going to be authorize, just like you would see in API. Notice we go to API, let's go to controllers, let's go to product controller, and we'll see the authorize, and actually it says role equals cashier. So only the cashier can do the get call on this. I'm actually gonna copy this because that's exactly what we wanna match on our products page. Authorize role equals cashier. Now, it's going to check this and make sure we have the cashier's permissions, not just that we're authorized. So this is, we're authenticated, cool, but that's not enough. So that's what authorized would be, is if, hey, if you're authenticated, good enough. But we're not only authenticated that we need to check for, we make sure we're authorized, which means we need to check to make sure we have permissions. In this case, we have to be in the cashier role. Let's start this up again. Tim at I am Tim Corey is in that cashier role, at least for now. We're gonna play around with that in just a minute. But for right now, let's go to the products page. Oops, you do not have access. So there's our message saying, no, you can't go here. That's a problem. Let's log in. So I'll log back in as Tim. Now, when you log in, it's gonna redirect you back to the home page. Let's go to products. I can see the products now. Cool. I can also see that, yes, they did load properly. Now let's log out again And let's pull up the WPF application and log in. Because we have this user management page here where I can say Tim, and let's remove Tim from the cashier role. Okay. And now let's come back over here and load in Tim again. You have to log out. You can't just stay logged in. But if I log back in as Tim, go to products page, oops, you do not have access. But I'm logged in. Yes, but you do not have that cashier role. That's false. Let's log out. Let's go back over here. Let's add the role of cashier back so I don't mess anything up with Tim. And we can close this out now. That should still work. In fact, let's just log back in. Make sure that, in fact, we can get back to the products page. And we can. So we have now added authorization to our page, not just authentication even. So that takes care of everything we need to cover today, really, in the fact that we've wired up our product, which seems to be the easiest part. We have called for getting that. We did an await on this because this is an asynchronous call. Not a problem. We have the on-initialized async version, so we can make that call. We load up products. We only show the products if they're not null. So we don't have to load up a temporary value for that class and overwrite it. So we can say, hey, no product's been loaded, and then drop right into here's the products that have been loaded. And we also added the authorize on here to make sure that we show off the fact that yes, they have to be authorized, and yes, it has to be a cashier method or a cashier permissions. Now, this is something that people often question the logic of, and that is that cashier is hard-coded. And yes, it absolutely is. It is hard-coded. You can make these into global variables of some kind to try and have one place to change them, but really, you shouldn't be changing your roles like that. Your roles should be pretty much the same. They should not change, and roles are pretty broad buckets. They're not really, really specific. So it is fine to hard code like this. In fact, that's production ready. You shouldn't have to make sure that everything is a static variable or something like that. So just so you know, that is not a problem. And yes, it does mean you have to know which permissions a page should have, but that's kind of what you should know probably, because you shouldn't be allowing people to go to a page that they're not authorized to go to. Or if they do go to that page, you should be saying, hey, no, you can't actually view this data. Now we could, again, do a check on here, do a try catch, and say, hey, if you get the unauthorized or not authorized response back, exception back, then show an unauthorized message on the page instead. You could do that, and then it wouldn't matter if the page is if they're authorized to the page or not. But this is a lot cleaner at the top here, just to say what it is right up front, what they're authorized for. Now, these spaces are getting to me. I mean, this is a lot of white space for our page. So let's go ahead and fix that by changing it all over to 2 spaces. Let's do this at the solution level. So right click on the solution and say add editor config. We'll wait for editor config to set up. This is a newer interface. Actually, it's a GUI interface instead of having just the just a JSON file, which is much harder. So tab size, let's change it to 2. Indentation size, also 2. We can hit save on this, and we can probably review the rest of this and see if there's anything else we want. But I think that's good enough for now. And then we can do a format on this, which I believe is Control-K, Control-D. If you go to Edit, Advanced, Format Document, which is, yep, Control-K, Control-D. That should, it did not. Excellent. Let's rebuild the solution first. Make sure we get that applied. Well, that didn't work. So I just crashed Visual Studio, reopened it, tried different things, and it looks like this is a bug. because it's not working in just Razor Pages files. If we go to, let's scroll up here and go to the home controller. You can see right here, we have that same 4 spaces here. But if I right click on the home controller, or I can just Control KD, let's just do that. And there we go, it formats it. And if I want to, and this is gonna bury our stuff in changes. Let's Control Z here. I'm gonna go to Get Changes and just add these changes for now. So these 4 changes, I'll stage these, and we're gonna call this the Add Products to Products page. That's good enough, and we'll go ahead and hit stage for that. But before we go ahead and push that up as our last change, let's format everything to use this new editor config, which applies at the solution level. So right click on solution, and what we're going to do is we're going to say clean, nope. There you go, analyze and code cleanup. And so in here, we're going to say run code cleanup profile 1, which is going to include the editor config changes, which is going to be a significant number of changes because it's going to change every single file, or it should. But the reality is it won't, because it's not going to change our Blazor pages. That seems to be the bug. So, yep, no changes there. Just so you know that this is working, if you hit Shift Tab and get the if out of order, and then hit Control KD, it's going to put it right back where it goes, but it's still the 4 spaces. So I'm going to submit this as a bug and see if we can't get this solved. It was originally submitted as a bug and solved in June timeframe or July timeframe of this year, but it seems like that bug is not totally fixed because it is not working, and I do have the latest version, which is 16.11.1. So whatever the problem was, it's still hanging out there a little bit and not solved. But it should look like this, where it collapses things down a little bit more, gives us a little more horizontal space, takes up less space per indentation. So that's now applied. Notice that we have an awful lot of changes that are going to be committed now. Be careful to not lump other fixes in with this fix, because this fix is quite excessive. So in here we can just say apply new code formatting rules. That's fine. We'll commit that as well. And now I can push that up to the server, and we can get our changes on the server for the next round. Okay, so I'm going to give you all those changes. If you're a Patreon member, they'll all be on there. But you know, most of those things are just spacing issues. They're just spacing fixes. But you can look through the source code and see what changes well. I believe it does also change the using statements as well. Okay, so that though concludes the lesson. Once we get the editor config properly set up, or actually it is set up properly, once we get figured out why it's not showing when it should be showing the correct formatting, then hopefully we can just apply that to all our Razor page files like we did before. We just right click on the portal if you want to, and we can say the code cleanup and run code cleanup profile 1, and that will apply that editor config, or Control KD on every document you want to apply it to. So, but for now, it works. It's just not as clean as I'd like. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. Next lesson, we're going to replace this image, this dummy image, with a real image. And that may sound super simple, except for the fact that we don't have images anywhere. So we have to go all the way back to our database, put images in there, and then put images in our API, and then get images into our Blazor WebAssembly project and display them properly. So that'll answer a lot of questions people have around, well, how do you store images in SQL? And how does that all work? So we'll take care of all those questions in that lesson. Until then, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, post them down below in the comments. I'll try and get to as many as possible. keep practicing, keep trying these things out, try out different things, see what works, what doesn't work, and really make sure you understand the topics that we've covered today.